A Shalom Akim, Shalom, Shalom, all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Ba'ashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakwadash. Double honors to the apostles and the elders of Great Millstone for teaching us his truth, and salutations to the sincere Akim and Aquathim and listen. May the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Brother Okwai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will as always an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I kind of just wanted to go through a little bit of history in regards to the so-called Italians and a lot of them being Israelites, right? So, and briefly what inspired this lesson was I happened to run into somebody who was from Italy, and they essentially I was having an interaction with them, and then they saw a piece of jewelry that had a crown on it, and they expressed to me, they said in their spirit that they were like, in few many words, they said, this is something, that crown is something that speaks to me, it's something that's, it resonated with me, right? That's what the individual, that's what the man said to me. So I asked him, what does that speak to you? It's not, and then he said, well, it's not really like an arrogant thing, it's just that, that just, it's something that really, really speaks to me. And that's something that's just who I am, So this is what, this is what the gentleman said to me. So, I asked him, so where you from? And he said he's from Italy. And then I said Calabria, right? So, Calabria is one of the I guess you can call it like a province in like southern Italy. And he's like, how did you know? And then I was just guessing, to be honest with you. So I'm just kind of like recounting a little bit of the details in regards to what inspired this lesson, because he kept saying the word, this crown, he saw a crown pendant on a piece of jewelry that I had that resonated with him, right? And he said that really speaks to him. That seems like it was something that was him, right? And a few things came to mind, and I queried him and I asked him what was his last name. He said his last name was Princey. So what I want to do, because one of the things you will notice in different interactions is that we're all over the world, right? We're as the sand of the sea, and then you have a lot of our people who don't look like your typical Israelite. That's another thing also. So it's very, very important to in these situations to be very, very spiritual, right? So because the scriptures say that the spiritual man judgeth all things, right? So as a matter of fact, let me open up with this precept here, and always those will this lesson will be edifying, right? So I'll go to Deuteronomy chapter 28 verse 64, and it says, and the Lord Yahweh shall scatter thee among all people from one end of the earth even unto the other, and thou shalt serve other gods, which neither thou nor thy fathers have known, even wood and stone, right? So part of the curses and part of our punishment as a people is that we would be scattered all over the world, and then in those different places, those different lands, what Jake would do, they, as the sons of God, back in like when you read Genesis the 6th chapter, they see the daughters of men, they see the daughters of the other nations, and they go and they copulate with them, So through generations of time, what you will have is a lot of children, a lot of Israelites that don't look like your typical Israelite. A lot of them will look like, in the nations where they were scattered, as a matter of fact, right? So in this situation, I'm speaking to an Israelite who doesn't really look like a typical Israelite. It kind of looks more like, what do you call this guy? The actor Robert De Niro, right? So what I found, I kind of just wanted to bring out some information in regards to a lot of the Italians, because the portion of the southern Italians, the those southern provinces in Italy, a lot of them got conquered by the Moors. A lot of them conquered by so-called Negroes that were just going into the ways of Islam at that time, because that was shortly after the so-called, revolution. But so I want to read off this website right here. This is ItalianAmericanHerald.com. So the last name he told me his name was called Princey. So this is Prinzi for brothers who want to look it up, right? And do some more research if this lesson may resonate with you, right? So it says Princey, the surname derives from the Italian word princip, meaning prince. It is only registered with the bureaus of vital statistics in 13 regions. What is the possibility that present day Italian families with this surname are descendants of royalty? Pretty good considering that up to 1861, the Italian peninsula was broken up into many different city states and ruled by foreign kingdoms like Spain, France, Hungary. Variations are known as Princio. So here's another one that I thought was very interesting. I just want to share this. Another last name that they had was Profeta. So this says this surname was Greek, derives from the Greek word prophetess, meaning prophet. It is registered in the Bureau of Vital Statistics in 17 out of the 20 Italian regions, right? So, it says it is mostly present in Sicilia, which makes sense given the island's long connection to Greece. The three regions where it is not present in Trentino, Alto Adige, Val d'Aosta, strangely enough, Calabria, despite its historical ties to Greece, right? So Calabria is one of those southern parts of the Italian region where a lot of the Moors conquered, right? So excuse me, I just wanted to read a little bit about the Moors. So I'm going to go into this book here known as Nature Notes on Color Line, right? So I'm going to read from page 99. I'm going to jump across where it kind of discusses a little bit more about Italy, right? So it says, so this is page 99 in Nature Knows No Color Line, and it says to be jet black and primitive in appearance, unlike our times, was considered desirable. Therefore, Negroes or other could or are those who could trace ancestry to them had Negroes in their family crests. Again, Moor was once a symbol of power of all of Europe because during this time, Europe was being ruled by so-called dark-skinned Negroes and dark-skinned people, and that is a piece of history a lot of our people are very, very unaware of. They are unaware of the actual accomplishments, the what's it called, the contributions that they've offered and given to Europe. The architecture, the irrigation systems, castles, cleanliness, um, fruits and vegetables that they've introduced. The Moors were one of those people that introduced different universities, and they actually brought Europe into that upper echelon that people know it today. It's known as a symbol of class and status and so on and so forth, right? So as I'm speaking about that, let me go to let me just go here. Okay, this is Revelation 20, verse 1, and it says, and I saw an angel come down from heaven, having the key of the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand, and laid hold on the dragon, the old serpent, which is the devil and Satan, and bound him 1,000 years, and cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut up, put a seal upon him, and he should deceive the nations no more until the 1,000 years be fulfilled, and after he must be loosed a little season, right? So a man would come after the workings of Satan and would be bound for a specific amount of time. So during this time, known as the Middle Ages, the Dark Ages, was a period in time where you had so-called Negroes ruling the different parts of Europe. They ruled from different countries such as England, France, Wales, Germany, Russia, Sweden, and Scotland, Ireland, and there were still remnants of those people still there, right? Those people, eventually they had status, they had wealth, they had resources, they were in control. As a matter of fact, you can look this up. There's a very famous German tapestry, excuse me, where you had so-called dark skin, or at the they were also known as swarthy, meaning dark, people that were present inside of a castle, and then you had the so-called white people um, being outside the castle barefoot, right? So it showed you that there was a shift. You Israelites you're not the servile as you see yourself on TV, right? You're not as you're not what was it called? You're not the thugs. You're not the gangsters that you're normally portrayed to be on TV. You're a royal generation, and you're a chosen generation, as the scriptures say, and a royal priesthood, right? um, Let me go back to that. Right. As a matter of fact, let me go back to the book here. And it says, and at the time when prowess in battle first ranked, Moors had a reputation second to none. In England, says McRitchie, blacks were always a servile race, right? And that's true. We're not a servile race. We're a royal people. As a matter of fact, let's go back to Deuteronomy. Okay, this is Deuteronomy 7, verse 6. And it says, for thou art an holy people unto the Lord Yahweh thy power, and the Lord Yahweh thy power hath chosen thee to be a special people amongst unto himself above all the people upon the face of the earth, right? So we're a special people unto the Lord Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, right? We're the chosen people, and the Lord hath not dealt so with any other nation, right? So, but going back into the article, that actually mentioned the word princey, meaning princep, meaning prince. So I wanted to just read this here. Excuse me. I'm kind of jumping around a little bit. But I sincerely pray and hope that this lesson, is edifying, right? So this is the book of Genesis, chapter 32, and it's verse 28, and it says, and he said, thy name shall no more be called, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel, for as a prince thou hast power with the Most High, Yahweh, and with men, and has prevailed. And it shows you that our that's what that noble echelon, that noble title comes from. We are children of Israel, Israelites. Yasher Allah, he is a prince of the power, right? So we carry ourselves, and through these laws, statutes, and commandments, the Lord gave us these things, which creates a sentiment of conduct, a sentiment of nobility, and because we know that we're above these other nations, right? We're a moral seed. We're an honorable seed. We're not like these other nations that perform these different abominable different practices, right? So I just wanted to read that, in regards to being a prince, because that's something that a lot of our people, because they don't, because of that deception that Esau has pushed forth, him being loosed out of his prison for a little season, our people, when they see that deception on TV, because he should, Satan would eventually get loose, and he shall go out to deceive the nations. One of the things he deceived was you Israelites, because he portrayed you into you seeing yourself as inferior and seeing yourself as three-fifths of a human and subscribing to that filthy ideology and thinking that you come from chimpanzees and you come from apes, and you need to be civilized. So I'm not just talking about so-called Negroes. I'm talking about all the tribes, because you Israelites, you're not seen as, when you look at TV and programming, you're described as somebody, people who just need to be, casted away and getting rid of. Back in, for example, back in, I believe it was the 80s, when Hillary Clinton, when there was that war on drugs, during that time, a lot of you Israelites, you so-called Negroes, specifically were referred to as super predators, because you're seen as essentially a threat, right? But you have to understand, you are a noble, chosen, royal people, right? But not only knowing it, but conducting yourself in such a manner. You're not the wild pit bulls, right? So um let me just read a little bit more. As a matter of fact, I didn't explain this portion as well. There, if you look on the screen here, some of those names, a lot of those names go back to Moors. They're variation of the word Moor, and some of those names, those last names, are Italian last names. So Morelli was one of them. Morini was another. Um, when you go back into it, it actually, there are variations of the Moors, right? So at some point, further down the line, you had different families that took on that last name. Like, for example, in the Caribbean, you know um, a common last name is actually just Moore. Morrison, that's another, right? But just to show you that presence is still there today. Okay, let me just find the next excerpt here. Just bear with me on this. Okay, this is page 121, and it says, in Venice, Negroes were gondoliers. Caldani mentions a Negro, a shoemaker there, a famous painter, Aldo Manuzio, had a Negro in his print shop, from whom came the phrase printer's devil. Um, Further on, it says Negroes became favorites and jesters in the Italian courts. As a matter of fact, let me just expound on that. Gondoliers, right? So gondoliers, they were essentially people who okay, someone who prepares and steers a gondola. So if you look at you just Google it. There's those guys that kind of like, they work around, they work along the river, right? And they steer those boats like you see in those like European, Italian, different movies, right? Okay, so it says the king Ren of Sicily had several. These blacks were sometimes crowned in jest and in court festivals. It says, as a result of the importation of Negroes, many southern Italians and Greeks in the 18th century were so dark that Napoleon had ran short of Negroes for his black brigades. He used them. Sicilians were then much darker than now, and that's true, because a lot of them eventually began to mix with so-called white women, and they lost a lot of their complexion, right? But a lot of, if you look at a lot of the so-called Sicilians and so-called Southern Italians, a lot of them have the thick lips, curly hair, dark hair features, kind of like how so-called Negroes have that full lips, broad nose, and what's it called, curly hair, because we have so-called Negroes, you have that the kinkiest, that type 4 hair, right? So over time, you start to see that the skin color changing, but the scriptures, talk about how we would be a speckled bird, right? And nationality is really determined by our fathers, right? So you have a lot of our people still there to this day. They just don't look like, they will not look like a typical Israelite, but a lot of them, you know, would flock to their own kind, right? As a matter of fact, because it mentions Sicily, a lot of our people were even, a lot of those so-called Sicilians were even lynched when they came to different parts of America because they weren't considered white up until recently. So, right, get something here. This is Jeremiah 12, verse 9, and it says, "My heritage is unto me as a speckled birds. The birds round about are against her. Come ye, assemble all the beasts of the field, come devour." Right? So, this is, it's very, very, I notice it's very, very important to stay a very, very spiritual and having these different conversations with, with when go about your day, with people, because a lot of our people, because they don't have the understanding of history, and the apostles always push this vibration, the understanding of history, to know the mystery, right? Because that prophecies will be scattered. That's part of the curses. And we will be looking like all the other nations where we got scattered through different mixing and mingling, right? So, but you would have our people, they would look like these other nations. That's why it's important to, stay spiritual in these different situations. This is First Corinthians 2, verse 14. I'll start at verse 13, and it says, "Which we also speak not in the words which man's wisdom teacheth, but which the Holy Spirit teacheth, comparing spiritual things with spiritual," right? So we're not going on, excuse me, we're not going according to the way Esau teaches in his institutions, because the way they teach it, going back to that deception, skin color is what determines, for them, skin color is really a nationality, and that's not true, because when you look at the table of nations, there was divisions, right? And another thing also, what messes the minds of our people, they think that they're the Egyptians, and you're not Egyptians. The Lord put a difference between the Egyptians and Israel, right? A lot of these so-called Egyptians, the originals, have they had dark skin, which is true. As a matter of fact, I believe there's an account where Paul actually got mistaken for an Egyptian, but it shows you the Lord made a separation. As a matter of fact, okay, let me go to that. Let me go to that 1 second. Okay, Deuteronomy 32, verse 8. And it says, "When the Most High Yahweh divided to the nations their inheritance, when he separated the sons of Adam, he set the bounds of the people according to the children of Israel. The Lord's portion is his people, meaning the Israelites. Jacob is the lot of his inheritance," right? So, the Lord made divisions going back from Adam, and then Adam had, Cain and Abel, then he had Seth, and down to Seth, going all the way down to Noah and Noah's three sons. You had, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and then through Shem, going all the way down to Abraham, then Isaac, and then Jacob, right? So the Lord chose those specific people that came out of the loins of Jacob only, right? I forgot the earlier point I was making. I'll just finish this up right here real quick. This is going back into Nature Knows No Color Line, page 122. And it says, "As a result of the importation of Negroes, many Southern Italians and Greeks in the 18th century were so dark When Napoleon ran short of Negroes for his black brigades, he used them. Sicilians were much darker than now, right? So that's pretty much it. But you had Negroes in positions of power. You had them in positions, in regular common positions, right? But going back to the point that, they were a noble people. They weren't seen as a servile race. They were seen as, like today, a lot of Israelites that have darker skin. There's the a lot of them get ridiculed for their dark skin, right? That's how shows how messed up we've fallen, right? So um that's pretty much it. And pretty much going back into the earlier point is just to be spiritual, when you confront different people, right? um because a lot of our people, you're gonna get a lot of our people who don't look like your typical Israelite, right? And what Esau has done, he's really confused the minds of our people, right? So they don't see, they don't behave spiritual. They behave very, very natural, right? So they think skin color is a denoting factor in determining a similar nationality, right? So anyways, I've rambled on quite a bit, but I sincerely pray that this lesson was edifying. I kind of just went all over the place. But I just like to give our praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai. Until next time, I say Shabbat Shalom.